Thank you. This is so exciting. We are very fortunate tonight. We have a critically acclaimed author, an award-winning filmmaker, Xiaolu Guo, with us. And her books have been nominated for prizes, and last year she was named one of the best British young authors by Granta magazine. This is a big deal because, as I understand it, the magazine only ranks the authors every 10 years, so once in a decade. So congratulations. And well, I know you were born and raised in a fishing village in southern China. Would you please share with our audience what life was like for you?
Hello, everyone. There's people behind. Do you want to come in front? Anyway, I'm very happy you are here, and there's so many people. It's really a warm thing for an author never been to Houston. And thank you for coming in the warm weather. I just fly from London yesterday. It was raining over there, so it's kind of cultural weather shock. If it's not cultural shock, you're so warm. In London, it's just only cold and 15 degrees every day. Anyway, so I somehow my novels are published much more in Europe than in America, just because I have been living in Europe for the last 12 years. So I grew up in South China, in a small fishing village in Zhejiang province. And then I left to Beijing, as everyone, you go to big city, big college to study in order to get out from the little town. So I was one of those youth, kind of get very bored in a small little village in China. So I went to Beijing. I studied film and film history in Beijing Film Academy. And then I stayed in Beijing for 10 years. I wrote 6 novels and many kind of film script, made film. And I felt stuck in China. I think I was very restless, kind of young punk, loves kind of Western beat generation, Western music and pop culture in the West. So I was desperate, wanted to leave China. And I remember in 2002, applied to scholarship, one in London, one in New York. Unfortunately, I didn't come to America. I went to England, London. And I didn't know it was so cold, then. Anyway, otherwise I would never apply scholarship in England. So then I left to China 12 years ago. And then I started my new life in London, published my novel in English. So that was weird, because I wrote all my novels in Chinese when I was in China. So it was very difficult to, suddenly I switched the language, which I never studied English before. And I remember 12 years ago when I came to London, I couldn't understand a word of their accent. Although, I speak kind of bad Chinese English, but it doesn't work at all in England, if you know what I mean. But I decided to write a novel in English called A Concise Chinese English Dictionary for Lovers, based on my broken English. And it's about a Chinese peasant woman doesn't understand English, and she writes a little dictionary for herself to communicate with a lover in London. So that was the first novel I wrote in English after 6 books in Chinese, and I think that was kind of very new life for me. I believe I can live in West. I believe I can write in my second language, which is English, because I think speaking English is quite different from writing English. Because writing is such a horrible journey. You keep censoring your language, the beauty of the language, the structure of the language, and you feel so nervous just to put down one sentence, and that sentence will be forever published, and that's your second language. So that's quite a mental trip for me, And then I left England. I went to live in Germany for 2 years because I was making some films in Germany, especially in Berlin and Hamburg. And after that, I went to Paris for two years, lived in Paris. And then I returned to London, and now I settled in London. And now I'm in Houston just for 8 hours. So please, ask me anything later on, if you want to know, kind of, the culture or my writing, how, because this book, I Am China, is my attempt to kind of, I wouldn't say analyze, to suggest a few personality in the modern world. They live in the both world, in the East and in the West, and they feel this split personality, the Asian personality and the Western personality, and they try to come to terms with this kind of split, which is to do with alienation, dislocation, loneliness, and lovelessness in a way. When you left your hometown, you have to recreate your life, you recreate your language. So there's English characters, there's 2 English lovers, who are the publisher, translator, and then there's 2 Chinese lovers, who are the artist, and one in America, one in Europe. And each of them try to find their kind of home, kind of spiritual home, and it's quite, in a way, melancholy journey for those characters. And I wanted to build this bridge between the East and West. So there's a book, yeah.
This book is really beautifully written. And after this conversation, please go and buy books. And so you can, I'm not spilling the beans to tell you how the book ended, but I can just tell you this was so beautifully written. And there are 3 main characters. I feel like I see you in all 3 characters in different ways. And also, I feel this book is sort of narrative within the narrative. The translator, her own life is unfolding before her eyes, and then she is a connector between the readers and this love story between these 2 lovers. And so, which character, which of the 3 do you identify with the most?
Actually, it's very strange. This is the first novel I try to write from a rock and roll man's point of view. So when I started the novel, there's this voice, very mad voice. There's a man who is a rock and roll punk star from China, which based on the real character. His name is Cui Jian, and if you come from China, you know exactly who Cui Jian is. He's the first punk musician in the 80s in China, was hugely banned. And his music, for example, 一无所有, I possess nothing in my life, or Long March into the future. So his music is like post-Mao punk political statement of the new China, which is kind of chaotic, opening up to the West, but still very troubled by its own ideological kind of coffin, let's say. So I try to understand, how a male punk speak. And I remember I was reading lots of, books, some, about Bob Dylan. But then I thought, but that's different. Bob Dylan is from still, quite free American kind of folk society. And the spirit is quite different. So I said, it's not Bob Dylan's voice. So Johnny Rotten, the English Sex Pistol, really angry punk, this kind of English punk. And I thought, it's different because China is not the 1970s Margaret Thatcher time, China is something else. It's more linked to Soviet, to Russian, this kind of, very heavy literature background, Eastern tradition, So and then in one point I thought, I just created this character, from my own kind of inner male hardness, because I'm quite a hard person and could be quite miserable person, as a writer. I think most of the writers are quite miserable inside, they try to make fun in the world. Anyway, so that really took me some years to find this voice. And so his voice is Kubla Jian. And I feel, I'm very close to him. And I think especially his anger and pain with his home country, China. And his feel this loneliness in the West, especially in Europe. But then again, another character, which is a very new character, her name is Iona. She's Irish, Scottish young woman who carries this kind of, let's say, island mentality from Ireland, Scotland, a little island in Scotland. And Iona is a name of this little mystical island in Scotland, if you have been to Scotland. So this is a very, very beautiful, mythical island in the north, in the Scotland, in the middle of the sea. And this island has something like 37 churches, but it's a very, very tiny island. So if you've been to Scotland, you feel this, you can feel this kind of spiritual dimension and also this kind of strive for living in a way, it's because tiny island is very cold and icy and windy. So the young people grow up there, they come down to London, to live in England. So somehow I wanted to create this young woman from Irish, Scottish background, but try to live in London to find her freedom, her sexual freedom or her romance, away from very lonely northern landscape. And this character I feel, of course, very close, and I think I felt quite alone or solitary when I live in Europe. And also she presented my literary taste. So this novel is very much kind of on the tradition of European literature. For example, Italo Calvino from Italy, If on a Winter's Night I Travel, because I'm interested in the narrative within narrative, a novel within novel, and I'm interested in the different voice in one novel. Because I kind of don't believe in, a novel just have one voice, which is one God voice, tell you from beginning to the end and then end. I think our reality is very, very chaotic, and you can have many voices in your head. So the novel has, three different me, in a way, three different voices, a man, woman, and then another woman who is kind of controlling the translation. I just kind of worry about if you don't know the plot or you know too much of the plot while I'm speaking. Anyway, the novel is about two Chinese lovers' story being unfolded by this English translator called Iona. And she discovers this huge political scandal or big political affair through these love letters and diaries these two lovers wrote to each other. So anyway, so that's the background, yeah. Yeah.
And I'm also very curious about your creative process. As you said, language and settings are tools, but not the first thing. You have written in both Chinese and English. Is the creative process the same?
Yeah, this is a good question. It's nearly academic question. How do you function? When you write in Chinese as a novelist, your novel is totally different. Yeah. When you write in English, my novel become something else. There's a tradition of writers writing in a second language. I don't want to compare myself with those amazing big writers. For example, we all know, Nabokov from Russian, but he writes in English, and he's one of the greatest English language writer. Samuel Beckett from Ireland, but he spent all his life in France and writing French. Or let's say the current ones like Milan Kundera from Czechoslovakia, but living in France, writing French for the last 15 years. But again, those writers are from the Western linguistic system, which you use A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You use 26 letters. But in Chinese, you have 20,000 characters. In Chinese, you don't function as, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that's it. You function like pictorial characters. You know how Chinese function, so you write sun or moon. Basically, it's picture of the sun and moon. You draw the shape of the object. Therefore, you gain that character. You cannot use the Western way. You put A, B, C, D together, you have red, or you have food, F-O-O-D. In Chinese, one character is one meaning. You can't just put together. So, and characters contain so much meaning or philosophy in the Chinese writing system. Therefore, it's very, it's quite a literature and a philosophical journey if you study Chinese. So, you often find the Chinese novels written in Chinese quite philosophical, but very small plot, very little plots. But if you, because I speak French, and I studied a bit German too when I lived in German. So I know 3 or 4 languages. I discover when I write in English, lots of drama, much more drama than I thought. And I personally, I couldn't write plot. I never could really write very plot-driven. I don't trust plot, but I trust voice and atmosphere, which is very Chinese, you know. I trust the poetic flow of a character in the landscape. So still, when I write in English, I still contain this very strong East Asian tradition. But then I can't help but play with structure, you know, play with drama. And I think I was very much interested in the Western, in European kind of postmodern writing, 50s French new wave, you know, writing and filmmaking, and a surrealist painting from Spain. So I can't help but play with structure, you know. So you find the beginning, the ending, you know. You find the middle part is return again later on, you know. And you find that the man become woman's voice, and the woman's voice become, and because this is my later European education when I left China, I was so fascinated by the literature experiment and the cinema experiment from 40s, 60s. So I become kind of hybrid of these two products, you know, which is very liberating for me, because I'm very quickly bored with one format. And I like to find a different format to inject the energy, you know, because sometimes story is very similar and you needed new energy to tell your story. So I think I benefit from writing in second language. And another problem is censorship problem, you know. I grew up in China as you know, I left China when I was 30. So I have this strong, this is invisible, yeah. When you live in China, I publish all my novels. But if you want to survive in China as a novelist, you have this certain sense of self-censorship, which means if you write about Tibet, you gotta be careful unless you just want to be in prison. Like our Nobel Peace Prize winner, Liu Xiaolu. If you want to be in prison, or you know you can fight inside prison, okay, you can, you know, write about those things. But I think for me, an artist is bigger, is beyond this political discussion. I think a bigger artist should be beyond that, should be much deeper than that. So I don't want this kind of ideological discussion interfere my work. So in a way, I will use a metaphor to write my novel. So, and I found it quite difficult, you know, use metaphor in China. But once I left, I write in English. I'm no longer worried about those censorship or self-censorship. So, you know, I can write about sex, or I can write about all kinds of weird stuff I want to write. And this is certain freedom, surely. And I'm sure it's the same in America, you know, if away from your home country, you can recreate yourself totally. Yeah.
There are 9 chapters in the book. And for each chapter, you start with a very famous Chinese saying, either by a philosopher or a writer in the ancient times. And I find that it's so deep. Did you write the chapters first and then found the quotes, or did you get the quotes that inspired you to write the chapters?
It's mixed, because if you want to write, you always keep your little diary, or you know, you always have some little notebook. And I think in my diary, you know, often it's nothing to do with me. It's just to do with, you know, what Kafka wrote, or what Nabokov, you know, his life would be, you know, when he's hunting for the butterflies, you know, for his hobby. Or, you know, my diary is full of quotation from Keats, or even Allen Ginsberg, you know, or Jack Kerouac, you know, Beat Generation. Because somehow the diary is kind of your secret drive, you know, what kind of artist you want to become, you know, what kind of inspiration you're taken from, or what kind of stuff you steal from the other colleague, you know. And I think those things I kept a note was so important to me. You know, it became me. You know, my novel became my novel because of those things I kept. And I always wanted to use them different place. But then it's not my work. So I realized I have to construct a big story, 300 pages, just to use them. For example, I loved this little quote by Keats. And I thought, how can I use this little poem one day? And then I just managed to put this as the beginning, you know, these 4 lines, beginning of the novel. about how difficult the true love, or how two lovers can meet, or how if you say if you separated by political problem, or separated by economical problem, or separated by immigration problem nowadays, if your lover is in Africa and you immigrate to America and you're stuck in that separation, how difficult is that? So I found this quote, and I managed to put in the beginning of the novel, which I will just read quickly. So this is from W.H. Auden in his poem called "As I Walked Out One Evening." So the poem, the line is, "I will love you, dear, I will love you, till China and Africa meet, and the river jumps over the mountain, and the salmon sing in the street." And I loved it so much, so I said, well, I have to put in the beginning of the novel. Doesn't matter what's about. It was like, anyway. So those are just really my kind of drive, and I think it's very important to do artwork, whether you are a painter or poet or whatever art you're doing, or sculpture. I think we really try to hold on to these things which inspire you, warm you, when you can't carry on, your work. And that's why all this chapter starts from a quotation from very old China, ancient China. Normally I don't read much of ancient Chinese stuff, but certain stuff like from Zen, from Lao Tzu, I quite like. And I think it's good to use a little bit. But, and then I have to create my Western style of narrative anyway. Yeah.
And I find the book is so philosophical. And I love the little passage about Iona talking about when she was a little girl, a story her mother used to tell her. There were two little young fish swimming in the river, and there came an old fish, and the old fish said to the two young fish, "Good morning, how is the water?" And the two young fish swam on and looked at each other and said, "What the hell is water?" And so Iona was saying that sometimes she felt like she couldn't really see the world clearly. And it's because, but she was actually witnessing it, and she was feeling it vividly. And when you write, do you feel sometimes that, because Chinese, we have a saying, 不识庐山真面目，只缘身在此山中. That means we really don't see the nature of Lu Mountain, because you are right in the middle of the mountain, so you don't really see the whole mountain. So when you write, do you feel sometimes you get parts of it, or do you feel you always see the whole picture?
No, you can't. I mean, I'm a very chaotic writer, because most of my time I make films, apart from living, So I was trained as a filmmaker for more than 12 years, first in Beijing and then in London, and then I went to Paris, carried on another 1.5 years, film training, whatever. So sometimes I felt like, the cinema is my first passion. So I kind of learn the narrative from cinema rather than from reading novels. And in a way, when I write, it's always very kind of visual-led, montage-led, like editing. So that you feel this novel very much like a film, because the space, cut from, Lausanne in Switzerland, and then suddenly in Paris. And then you a year before someone, the girl is still in Beijing, try to leave China. And then a year later, a man walking down in the street in Greece, And then you feel that, the space and time is being very cut up. And you kind of feel kind of chaotic in a way, And that's how I function in a way, when I write. Sometimes for example, this novel, I know the ending before I write. So, which is horrible, you know the ending, and then you have to write 400 pages to arrive at the ending, And then the ending is strong, yeah, and then you have to stick with it. But you know how impossible to control character's destiny, because character change when you type something slightly random. Oh, the character has a love affair, which is not going to that ending at all. And I say, oh God, come on, go to that ending. And you have to, kind of control your children in a way. And they clearly want to become someone else. So I find that kind of every day, being driven by this kind of impulsive, kind of different passion, and I try to control them. But one thing's for sure, what kind of artist you are and what kind of book you make. I certainly am not making a book, sometimes some books are quite boring. I would read the first 2 pages, I lost patience because some book doesn't offer surprise or doesn't offer beauty in a way, and that bores me a bit. So I kind of, I want a beautiful, elegant book, and with very sensual quality. So I certainly can't write, Stephen King type of book. I found it not sensual, I found too dry and too plot driven, So you are this kind of writer, and I think that's from my, academic training or whatever. I was very much in love with Xiaolu Guo cinema and Marguerite Duras's novel, as I said, Calvino, or Pasolini cinema, and even, lots of books by Sartre, and I found very interesting. But when I was reading Sartre's La Nausée when I was young, and it was like one of the book I trust, and I would read again and again rather than reading some new novels about whatever story. So I think that built the atmosphere of the book, and also I published some other books, and you find a very similar pattern. The characters are quite impulsive, and they're all very sensual, and they've been lonely, and they all longing for love. It's kind of hopelessly romantic in a way, But then they're all very kind of bleak. I think because if you are too romantic, you end up very bleak because you're looking for some perfect vision of life, and it doesn't exist in reality anyway. So these are, I think, the general pattern in my novels and in my films as well. Yeah.
But they are always with humor.
I hope so. Well, yeah, I hope so. I hope it works in America. Yeah.
You mentioned that film was your first passion, and so when did you sort of realize that you are actually very good in writing?
I think they go together. I think I'm interested in constructing an imaginative world rather than living in the reality. So in a way, the film can provide such a vivid, colorful, imaginative world. Say, if you watch an amazing, beautiful film, especially old classical film, you live in that place and you hate it when the film ends. You're crying, character died, and you say, oh shit, now I have to cook some, whatever, some toast, and then you have to wash nappies, and then you have to clean the floor, hoover the floor, and I say, shit, where this beautiful world, And I think that such a power, I wanted to live in that world. So I was very kind of dismiss the trivial reality. So I think I pushed my life very, very late. I had a first child, only recently, and I said, okay, all this domestic, I should push as late as possible. So I should write my novel, make my film. I want to live in that world. And of course, it's very, childish, naive, crazy habit to try to construct another reality. And I think lots of filmmakers, they got very depressed after finishing the film because they have to have a big crew, have lots of money to create another space, especially historical drama, because this historical drama offer you a kind of a longing or a nostalgia, for a space and time it doesn't belong to, but you want to belong to. So anyway, and I think again, it's the artist pattern. You want to live in another world. Yeah.
You once said an author is a good thief. I wonder whom have you stolen from?
Well, for sure, I have no secret. I'm going to tell you, and you also should learn if you want to paint or write or do sculpture. You need to be a great thief. Yeah, just steal, because during the stealing, you understand how to reorganize the object. For example, some thieves stealing motorbike or little bike, yeah, and they will rearrange the motorbike, and become their own bike, and you can't recognize it, and actually it's yours, and that's a good thief. Anyway, so I do the same, because I was very much in love with, Beat Generation, Allen Ginsberg, Kerouac, I love Patti Smith, in whatever format, and I think especially reading Ginsberg in China, how an American, especially American for some reason, I was thinking this Ginsberg poem, America. I thought, if I change this title or this word American in that poem, every word American I change into China, would it work? And I did an experiment. I changed every word American in Ginsberg poem, and it works. And I thought, actually I'm going to use this as my title, I am China, because in Allen Ginsberg poem, there's one line called suddenly, it occurs to me, I am America. And then I changed that line, suddenly it occurs to me, I am China. So then I use it as title, and I use one of my character, a woman poet. She did this American tour, and she was reading some poems. And she did this poetry reading, which is cover version of Allen Ginsberg. And I think maybe I should read you a little bit of this poem, the reason why I wanted to use this poem. Sorry, I'm just improvising. I didn't actually plan to do this little reading. The title, I'm China, this novel, I just wanted to say something. It doesn't mean I am China. It means this Chinese word should be replaced. I'm German, or I'm American, especially, because American is such a big identity, or I'm British, I'm Indian, I'm Japanese, because it's about the distance between you and your identity. And the identity is often a very fake one, it's superimposed one. For example, if you're a Muslim woman living in Iraq, does that mean your identity have to be absolutely living inside the Muslim tradition? Yes, you had to, and you have no choice. So identity is sometimes a miserable, negative concept, to strap, to basically to wrap you up, to basically to cut you off from the freedom. But sometimes the identity is a great stuff, to root you in certain culture, to make you become a social person rather than a naked individual without a social position. So I'm very suspicious with this identity idea. But anyway, so the title I'm China can be replaced by any country and any identity. And this poem I want to read is a cover version of Allen Ginsberg. And this young woman poet, her name is Deng Mu, and she basically replaced this word American to China. As you know very well, in American, this original poem, where it's come from. China, I have given you all, and now I'm nothing. China, $2.27. China, I can't stand my own mind. China, when will you end the human war? Go fuck yourself with your atom bomb, China. I don't feel good, don't bother me, China. I want to write my poem till I'm in my right mind. China, when will you be angelic? China, when will you take off your clothes, China? When will you look at yourself through the grave? When will you be worthy of your million atrocities? China, why are your libraries full of tears? China, when will you send your eggs to India? I'm sick of your insane demands, China. When can I go into the supermarket and buy what I need with my good look? China, after all, it's you and I who are perfect, not the next word. China, your machinery is too much for me. You made me want to be a saint. China, there must be some other way to settle this argument. Borrow is in Tangiers, and I don't think he will come back. It's sinister. Are you being sinister, or is it some form of practical joke? I'm trying to come to the point, China. I refuse to give up my obsession, China. Stop pushing. I know what I'm doing, China. China, the plum blossoms are falling. So in the original Allen Ginsberg poem, Americans, very long, and I just basically use kind of a few paragraphs for this cover version. So to say my point, if there's a point, anyway. Yeah.
That was beautiful. I'm sure our audience have many questions, and why don't we invite some questions from the audience?
Oh, yes. This, yeah.
Young lady? Sorry.
It's interesting, people don't want to admit, they are actually totally split, with different culture, or they feel dislocated, or they feel lonely in the modern society, because it's like a failure if you admit that. And in a way, I think it's great if you can talk about it, because everyone else has suffered from that problem, especially we are no longer living in the agriculture society, which means in the old lifestyle, you live on your land, generation for your families, you grow your own fruit and vegetables, you sell your food in the market, there's a continuation of reality. But since the Industrial Revolution, starts from England, from 18th century, I think we are industrialized. The land is no longer the land we belong to. The land is a commercial place we sell things from and make a living. And the land is a place we're leaving behind. So the continuation of lifestyle is cut. And we often leave, the home is some place where you have to leave, to become a person, an adult person. And then this I felt very strong in my life. For example, I grew up in a small village, and my grandparents have land, have rice fields, we have buffaloes, all that, and then they died, and then we moved away. We went to the big city, and I didn't have friends because we moved, to bigger city. When in the bigger city, everyone's very competitive, aggressive, to make space for their life. So they have no time for intimate friendship. It's all about study, become someone. And I think, in a way, this kind of modern life creates certain kind of discontinuity, and you have this kind of old you, belong to some kind of nostalgic past, and then this new you, which is very aggressive, competitive, refuse old friendship, refuse some kind of soft emotion, because you want to be number one, to be there in the world, to be important. And I think these two sides fight, and I think I always feel this conflict in me so painfully, that sometimes unbearable. But then, I write about them a lot, and the character suffers from those problems a lot. And I don't think it's especially Chinese problem or third world problem, and I think an American would be the same in a way, because we are on the road, we have to be on the road in order to get somewhere which gonna offer you a future, a better future. So you keep leaving things behind. Or in a lover's relationship, you in a way, you leave one lover for a new lover, and actually, instead of gathering love in your life, you keep abandoning the old person, and you split from that past. And I think that in a way, sometimes we become thinner and thinner. But some people do gather love, gather wealth, they become richer, emotionally speaking. But anyway, I think it's not very material problem. It's really a spiritual problem. And also, I think it's great in the novel you can write about that, which is, I think, quite soothing for some readers to read out a person's problem in a very interior word. Also in London, I was very much into psychological study, all that, and we always talk about the thing, sanity, being sane. And this great psychoanalyst in the UK, and he wrote a book about being insane. You know, like we need to understand what's insanity. Being insane maybe is not worst thing, you know, because insane and sanity is created by our modern society. So we define what is wrong, what is mad, and what is right, what is proper, which means we define other life, some kind of illegal life or mad life. And one of my characters end up in a mad hospital in Lincolnshire, which is a misdiagnosis, of course. And he suffered those problems in the hospital treat him. But I think, you know, our society is organized in such an order that human being catalogized like objects. You know. But anyway, you know, if you do art, I think there's great area for you to explore these possibilities. You know, no one should be categorized or marginalized in any artwork. So, yeah. That gentleman, yeah.
Yeah, do you know what about the Beat generation attracts you or interests you?
Yeah. I think the you know, for example, when I came to the West, when I came to Europe, I discovered actually Charles Bukowski, which I didn't read much. Charles Bukowski in China. Maybe the translation never really worked well with Bukowski because it's so slang and kind of San Francisco streets, you know. And it was drunken male language, you know, talk about sexuality, you know, women. I didn't really connect when I was in China, but I loved it. You know, the last 10 years I was reading a lot Bukowski. And I never really reread Kerouac in the last 10 years. I think, as I said, you know, the direct, sensual language, the directness of this loneliness, emotional connection with love, and also the being abandoned by a mainstream society, you know, being abandoned by proper love, for example. Because his character is kind of loser, you know, drunken man, you know, in the street looking for love, you know, like Tom Waits kind of persona, you know. And I think it's always very sensual, very raw, you know. It's not a kind of, you know, hotel life, you know. It's raw. You can touch the texture of sadness and the beauty of emotional life. So I instantly drawn to that. But also, I drawn to American modern literature much more than I drawn to English Victoria literature. Because Victoria literature is very difficult for someone like me, you know, to understand this domestic kingdom run by some governess in Victoria society in some Winchester house, which is like, what and where the hell is that? But, you know, modern American beat generation talk about San Francisco or even, you know, whatever, you know, New York, downtown, whatever. I know those kind of landscape, you know, through readings, through television. So I instantly connect to that, and also the modernity in the language, you know, so direct. If you're a writer, you're very sensitive to this modern language, and you learn, you can steal, you know, those style, you know, rather than you look at Victoria literature, you said, I could never write like that. So Shakespeare actually never really worked for my stealing, you know. And really, you know, B generation is my mentor in a way, yeah. Oh, there's many, sorry. Is a lady here?
Okay, thank you for coming here. And I'm always, as an Asian Society, big fan. I always proud anybody from China, either author or different one. So thank you.
Oh,
I have
great.
questions. One, have you made any movie about your books? And the second one is, I didn't have to read your book, but I just glanced and you talk about the blue color, clear color about the ocean, but also you from the fishing village. Is that impressed for you? Is still from your childhood when you were in your hometown, or you see something different, ocean, a different meaning?
Yeah.
And over the 12 years, have you been home how many times?
Every year. Anyway.
Xiaolu, I'm sorry, before you answer the question, let me just tell you something about Lily. That's Lily Foster. Her Chinese name is Chen Ye. She was a very well-known movie actress in China. She was the Donggong Huanghou. She was the good empress in Chui Lian Ting Zhen. And
Great,
she's married
great.
to Charles Foster. Mr. Foster is an immigration attorney here, and he is actually chairman of the board of Asia Society, Texas.
Nice to meet you too. Yeah. Maybe we should have dinner after this. Yeah. Where's we're going, Harry or something? Yeah, they told me. Yeah. Great question. I was very. I think I was very into this big political documentary when I was in China. It's about the yellow earth mentality being Chinese, or third world peasant culture. Have this yellow earth continental mentality. I can't remember I think it's Huanghe Hun or something. Big documentary. And then when I came to Britain, I kept meeting those people, from Mediterranean, little island, from Greece, from Ireland, or from Scotland, And they said, we don't have the mainland mentality. We have island mentality. I said, what is that? Island mentality. So I was very attracted to the idea to compare so-called island mentality and the mainland mentality. You Americans, mainland mentality, which means you can conquer the world, you can roll around either on a horseback or on a car, you can go from this side, east side to the west side, even 8 hours drive or 24 hours drive, but it's a big road culture, you can be on the road forever and you can change your space, find your different location and job, all that. But with people living on a tiny island, like little England, like I live, or people from Scottish island or from Greece island, those Mediterranean countries, they have to leave, like Spanish even. They had to go to conquer and kill all the Latin American aboriginals to colonize the whole Latin American. Or like little Dutch, they have to go, other country, go to Southeast Asia, to be colonist. But it's not the desire of conquering other land. It's a desire to live and to see the other bigger world, the big earth, So they were explaining that to me, and I said, wow, that's amazing. I never thought about that when I lived in China. China is such a big land, it's like in Russia. All you see is, people and the earth and the tradition, culture. You don't need to think about it. You have to go somewhere to see the world in a way. Only recently, when the industrialization come to the East, we start to leave, to be new generation of Chinese. But that's like a part of globalization. It's not particularly Chinese. But anyway, so I wanted to explore this. So this is very abstract answer to your very real question. Otherwise, some other question you ask. I'm attracted to the ocean culture, for example. Because I grew up in the Donghai, East China Sea, and my grandparents, they are fishermen, and then later on they lost their boats for some reason, and then they become peasant again. They have little land to grow things. And then they lost their land because communists have different kind of movement. And then they become little store seller. So that's all their life. So I grew up on the coast. And you always look at the sea. And nothing happening on the sea, but everything happening on the sea. The wave, the movement, the weather, seagulls. And so make you very dreamy. I always write about sea, unconsciously and consciously. And I'm very attracted to, culture from Greece, for example. The character end up in Greece. That's fine, I'll let you know. So I was on the boat, looking for a certain kind of blueness of life, as in comparison of China as yellow earth, yellow culture. The earth, the peasant, down to earth. All you see is the brownness. That's our past. So anyway, so I wanted to write about this blueness, as if for a character, that's kind of the freedom in a way. Again, my abstract answer. But anyway, I'm sure you feel what I try to say if you read the book.
About whether you made film based
exactly.
on the books.
Actually not. I think I'm very restless person, like very impatient person. So I wrote many novels, but I never really adapt my novels into films. Because I was trained as a filmmaker. So as a filmmaker, by background, you believe film is different language. Film shouldn't translate the literature. So film should invent its own montage, its own language. But by saying that, I wrote one story called UFO in Her Eyes. I wrote this story when I lived in Paris for 2 months. I was supposed to make a film there. I got this scholarship in Paris to make film. But then I thought, what kind of film I gonna make? So I was thinking, I want to write about this, surreal village in China. A woman saw a UFO, and then she told everyone she saw a UFO. And then police come to investigate if anyone saw a UFO. And then it's a big scandal, love affair being discovered in the village. I said, I want to make that film, but I will never write film script first, because I don't trust film script. Because you write one external night, 3 characters in the house, and the dialogue. There's absolutely no atmosphere. Yeah? So I thought, I'm just going to write into a little novel first, publish as a novel. So then I can, based on this novel, to make film. Then it's much richer for me. So I very fast, I spent 2 months in Paris writing this novel called The UFO in Her Eyes. And then the plan was successful. The novel was published, translated into different language, into French and German. And then I found my German and French producer who really funded the film. So they give me quite a bit of money to make the film. This novel is not published in America, but published in the UK and all European countries. For some reason, I don't know why they didn't pick this novel. It's quite abstract novel, It's actually the whole novel is 27 police interview about if anyone saw the UFO in the village. So I wish this could be in America. But anyway, so that's the only novel I wrote in order to make a film. And then after that, I just carry on. Either I make film, very different story, or I write novel. Because I feel that life is full of stories. I should kind of make a different story, giving birth to a different story rather than repeating the same story. Yeah.
But that UFO in Her Eyes, each interview kind of escalates. So really interesting. Go and get that book too.
I'm actually movie. Actually, I'm showing the film the day after tomorrow in New York in the Asia Society, and then I have a talk about that because it's barely shown this film. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Cindy. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Asia Society, to provide us a great event, introduce you to us. I just, with my friend, we started one Chinese reading group, which we call Chinese Women Happiness Reading Club. Now we have about 30 members. Our mission is through reading, empower women, and introduce your book to our audience.
Oh, great! Thank you. I know why I was telling people. In London, I live in London, which is, I think, the most expensive city in the whole world. And I'm paying mortgage every month. I said, oh, now I know why I can't be able to pay the mortgage, because you guys supporting me buying the books here. Thank you.
My question,
Thank you.
is, when we read your book, I know you're trying to tell a story about it. And
Yeah.
what's your advice for us to read your book? Focus on, and what's the main idea? What are you trying to say? Also, I saw you when I saw it walking. I can tell by how, because one hand in your hands is 顺机, another hand is walking. You are a powerful woman.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if I am, but anyway, good. Thank you. I take it. Yeah.
Finally, I like you, so I get some advice.
Advice, I don't know. I think every reader is potentially a writer, and in a way, because I see someone, they can't write, but they wanted to write, so they just use a recording machine to record what the way they describe someone's life, and they record it, and then they will get some secretary to type down their recording, transcript it. And it comes out an amazing story. So I said, every reader is a writer. It's just, one is you need to get encouraged to get confidence. Second is you need to find your format. For example, I cannot write as a third-person point of view. Although this book is written as a third-person point of view because it's many characters. So I cannot say I for every character. But I manage use I for every character because they are writing letters to each other. And they write diaries. So when you write letter and diary, it's always, I saw something and I felt something, So find your expression, your own expression, because you cannot just borrow someone's way, expression. So for me, I know I cannot write from the third point of view, and I don't trust that voice. I don't trust. He walks down the street, he thinks about his wife, and he thought, I thought, how did he know? And how do you know him? Anyway, as a writer. So I would transcript. I walk down the street and I think my wife was not right. Last time she told me this. And then immediately I become that character and it's much more intimate, you know. So that's a way, you know, I think that's a creative way to read a book and to identify who you are in the book. And also if you want to create your artwork, you know. Because often art is very narrative. Even you're doing music, it becomes a bit narrative, you know. So just put yourself as that person. Don't make the separation. Yeah. This side, yeah. Yeah.
How you think about the new generation from China? You have been to so many different countries, you must see a lot of travelers or international students.
Yeah. I can answer first question quite easily, but second question is very big and it can be too generic for me. Anyway, to choose actors for my film, because I don't care about the Hollywood big star, you know, for me that kills the trust of the character. So, you know, and also, you know, it's good to know you are not in Hollywood. I live in Europe and I'm Chinese, you know, I'm an independent filmmaker, so I don't use Hollywood system and they don't want me anyway. So now get your position clear, you have freedom. I mean, the sadness will be you imagine yourself living in Europe, have Hollywood system, and you have whatever, Tom Cruise, and you wouldn't. So, and first I would never trust them because Tom Cruise cannot play peasant in my film, and it's totally wrong, fake. You know, he should have his own life, yeah. So for me, the normal people in the street are amazing. And because also my film's training, you know, I love this real face, you know, the real action, real bitter, sweet, those real thing in the cinema. And I can only watch those kind of film, you know. So independent cinema, you know, say, you know, Woody Allen or Richard Linklater, you know, I really feel connected. And in Europe, it's more important, you know, be independent cinema filmmaker. So whenever someone famous, I just go away because I feel this kind of nervousness and distrust and the money issue and all that stuff. So especially, I think when you cast a character, you want looking for the certain similarity between the actor and you. And you can't find it from famous actors because famous actors are professionalized. They no longer have themselves because they're professional so wonderfully with a character that you don't know who is he anymore. So I just cast a very raw, very real person, and I love that. So all my films are with non-professional actors. Apart from UFO in Her Eyes, I cast quite famous old actor. Well, she was famous in the 90s, Shi Ke, and she was in the film Rock and Roll Youth in China, 摇滚青年. But because she was actually my friend when I lived in Beijing. So she was quite famous, but the rest are, you know, real street people, and I love that. New generation Chinese in the West. It's a very generic question. You know, I used to be very critical about younger generation, for example, because I was born in the 70s, so I thought people born after 70s maybe less romantic and, you know, less ideologically believing things because of the Western commercialization taking over China. You know, there's no difference between Western youth and Chinese youth. You know. And I used to be very critical, but then, you know, when you really know them, you know, people born in the 80s or people born in the 90s, they can be so confident with the society they live in because they didn't have this continuation of a history. Even they don't have the history, but in my generation, because I was caught between very traditional value and very romantic idea about life, and then this brutal ideological communist way of living, you know, you shouldn't have yourself, you know, yourself belong to some ideological state, big discussion, and then you try to create your own language to write. So I was in this kind of gap, this continuity of history and modern life, and which creates certain pain and loneliness. And with younger generation, I think it's quite coherent. We are no longer living in an agricultural society. We live in the internet generation. You can criticize as much as you want. The internet brings down the culture, the value. But this is a reality you live in. You better learn and find a good value in it, rather than being completely reactionary against it and then gloom and die. So, and it can be quite creative if you find your language through the computer science and modern technology. So I think I can't say such a generic thing what they are. Yeah.
Time goes by so fast. Last question.
Yeah. That gentleman. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Welcome to Texas.
I want to come back again. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question about Confucius.
Ooh.
But first, I want to say that Allen Ginsberg would have loved what you did.
He was very much influenced by Zen Buddhism. Yeah.
And I know that in my heart. I love that.
Thank you.
He would not call it theft. He would call it interpretation.
Maybe his spirit is standing somewhere behind this Asian house.
Now, my question about Confucius. I was in college at about the time you were born. One of my professors was part of the first academic delegation to go into Red China. He was part of a group of linguists. He came back from that trip, this was still 1974, telling us that a huge movement was underway to read Confucius in order to criticize Confucius. He predicted that the ideas of Confucius were so strong that they would overturn this communist idea of the self, which you characterize very beautifully, and that an individualism would begin to reassert itself. So my question is this: do you find a persistence of Confucian thinking in contemporary China, and do you find it even in your own work?
Okay, so this is very complex thinking and suggesting. I must say, sometimes I'm very suspicious with such a big word being overused and abused by certain ideological society. For example, Confucianism always been used by the state power, in the old days by the emperor. So they would take certain values to propaganda, and they will undermine some other values because the Asian Chinese because Asian China people were illiterate, so they're not literate. So you can't really read. You can only understand through interpretation, through the propaganda machine, which is the emperor's power. Yeah. So you can never get a real picture over the big picture. And in a communist regime, after 1949, there's a very ambiguous relationship between Confucianism, Buddhism, and communism. So I would say, I think the current government over the last 40 years, the government use some of Confucius' value system, but not really. I don't think on the whole it's been hugely propaganda as Marxism in China last 40 years. But then the way Chinese government use Marxism is from Russian translation rather than from original German language. And I think no one really ever understand original capitalism, Das Kapital, that book in German, because barely in China we read the original version to understand where it's come from. So we use the Soviet version, and which is also propagandized, cleaned up, So I think when a certain, it's like Buddhism. Buddhism was never really statalized, but it was largely used in a feudal society. But Confucianism was always been used by every dynasty and the current society, the current government. And in China now, we have this new intellectual group, used to call it 新左派, but now they call it New Confucianism Reform in China, which is kind of soften communist ideology, but strengthen the Confucianism. But it's very dangerous to do because Confucianism contains lots of feudal elements, which is in conflict with current society. Confucianism would never, promote, say, gay sexuality, or the freedom, before marriage, lots of stuff. Confucianism is not even mentioned or doesn't encourage. So that would be in conflict with modern society. And how does a family value system work in such modern society? We're all living our own family, and no longer I live with my family. Or that. The value system radically changed in China. How do you cope with that? So I think in our blood, the Confucianism, the tradition is much stronger than the communism ideology. That's deeper, much deeper in our blood. And I think also Buddhism tradition is much, much deeper than the communism tradition. Because communism only lasts 50 years, and it's Western stuff. We don't understand it. Class struggle, okay, it's from German, from Western Europe, and then transformed to Russian. It's very different from Chinese system. Anyway, and there's a concept of individual and self, which never existed in the Chinese history. Confucianism never really talked about self. Self is about selfless. But with Marxism, with capitalism, the center point is what's the value of self with the society. And this book, I'm China, I try to write about the individual's relationship with the society, with the state, and how the state try to statelize you, to propaganda you, to dissolve you, so for you to totally belong, dedicate to the state ambition. Because the state ambition is totally different from individual ambition. So anyway, so those are, I think, very complicated or philosophical question or discussion. I hope, you can write about PhD thesis about this, but then it might be better for me write as a fiction, so I can get by and, make ambiguous, make you wonder and puzzled. But thanks for mentioning that. Yeah.
Xiaolu, thank you so much for a stimulating evening. Thank you all for coming.